November 15th, 2024. This is episode 64 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, Joe Meade is with me. Tonight, Joe and I will go over the last week or so of Big Ten basketball. Joe, the games are starting to get a little bit more serious. And we're going to start with a game that happened last Friday after we recorded, and that was UCLA hosting New Mexico, neutral game against New Mexico. Richard Pitino's bunch goes in there and gets the W over then-ranked UCLA. Donovan Dent with 17, Nelly Jr. Joseph with 16 and 12. And in terms of UCLA, Tyler Bilodeau with 23, nobody else in double figures. Joe, you had UCLA winning the league. Are you starting to worry about that just a little bit?
No, I think a theme today is going to be me not overreacting to certain performances and not going too crazy. At the end of the day, Sean, the 21 turnovers by UCLA leading to at least 20 points for New Mexico, I think is the real story of this game. Something pretty unusual for UCLA teams, particularly Mick Cronin teams, whether that's been at Cincinnati or UCLA, has been poor discipline offensively, and that's what we saw in this game. Bad shot taking, even Tyler Bilodeau, 8 of 20, that's nothing to write home about. From three, 5 of 23. I'm a true believer that's not going to stand. Lazar Stefanovic, who I think is one of the underrated players in this conference, doing next to nothing. Aside from Tyler Bilodeau, everyone from UCLA did not play well offensively. Eric Daly Jr., who I'm also high on, didn't play well. So you look at it as a whole, Sean, and at the end of the day, New Mexico was one of the teams I picked to go to the Final Four. Clearly, that blew up in my face last year. But it doesn't change the fact they're a really good team, and they're a really experienced team. Nelly Jr. Joseph's been there for 3 years. Donovan Dent's been there for 3 years or 2 years as well. So this is a team that's played well together, that knows how to win. And although UCLA has some returners, they're still learning how to play with each other. And I think New Mexico caught them on the perfect night, which is why the Lobos and Richard Pitino walked away with the victory.
Yeah, and New Mexico is a team that, if they do beat St. John's this weekend, they'll probably find themselves in the top 25. They're always pretty fun to watch over the years, at least since Richard Pitino has gone down there. So I don't think that's a bad loss at all. It's just a couple of concerns for UCLA's. A couple of their transfers didn't play all that great, but they have looked pretty good in the other two games, beating Rider by 35 and Boston University by 31. Covering their analytics betting spreads by quite a few points in those games. They've got Lehigh on Friday, and then a bunch of bye games before they play Washington and Oregon to start off their Big Ten season, and then they play Arizona, North Carolina, and Gonzaga in between that 2-game Big Ten set and the rest of the Big Ten season. So they certainly have some time to iron some things out before it gets really real for them. But, all right, Joe, we'll move the calendar to Saturday now, and we had a couple of games here. One we're going to talk about is one that we did spend a lot of time on last week. Northwestern goes on the road to Dayton. They have an 8-point lead at halftime. They look like they're headed towards a victory, but Dayton outscores them by 13 in the second half, and Anthony Grant's team gets a victory over the Wildcats. Martinelli continues to play amazing, 32 and 14, but other than that, Northwestern comes up short.
Yeah, Sean, I think if you're a Northwestern fan, you're really going to kick yourself after this one. I thought they played well enough to win, and then I really think the home atmosphere of Dayton was the sole factor in this. The key factor is they are missing Brooks Barnheiser, but even still, that would have made this even more of a sweet victory. So, Sean, I think there's a lot of positives for Northwestern, particularly Nick Martinelli, 32 points. I believe he was Player of the Week, right, Sean?
Yeah, he had to be.
And if he wasn't, there needs to be an investigation because aside from a Bruce Thornton, I don't think anyone else could even hold a candle to Nick Martinelli. So I don't think this is very discouraging from Northwestern at all. I think Dayton, as Sean knows better than anyone on this podcast, is a very good team, a very solid program as well. And they had 4 guys in double figures, Sean, and they were getting it from all guys. So there's Nate Santos, the Zed Key, who Big Ten fans, particularly Ohio State fans, are very familiar with. So you look at this for Northwestern, a missed opportunity is all I would chalk it up to. I do think them getting Brooks Barnheiser back at some point is going to be good. Now I'm going to let Sean talk more about his boy Jalen Leach and the rest of the Wildcats.
Northwestern's trying to play Leach at point guard, and it's not really working. He's played fine, but he's a 3 really, and maybe a 2 in a Big Ten team with Nicholson, Martinelli, and Barnheiser. You'd think that Leach would play well there in the 2, but I guess Ty Berry should be a point guard more than Leach, but Leach was bringing up the ball a lot, especially when it started to fall apart for them. So, obviously a little bit disappointed from that point of view, but Leach is still playing good, still playing well. He's second in scoring, almost 12 points a game. And from once they get Barnheiser back, I am not worried about this team at all. They do play in an MTE against Butler. Not sure who else is in that tournament. Maybe you can get a couple good games there. But, Joe, you get a DePaul, you get a Georgia Tech. There's not a ton of tough games on the schedule here for Northwestern, so they probably can't afford another slip-up like this if they want to make the tournament. And maybe this is good because if Barnheiser is out, you probably don't want to play anybody very good. But, a little bit worried for Northwestern here. But on the other hand, they looked pretty good for most of this game. And Dayton is a team that will certainly be an at-large contender and has looked pretty good so far. And Dayton's in the Maui Invitational also. So, if they get a couple big wins there, you'll forget about this one real quick. But, Northwestern played well enough to win. They just couldn't finish the job. All right, Saturday included a couple other games, Joe, a couple close calls from Minnesota, Nebraska, and a loss for Washington. But Washington's looked horrendous, so we're going to step over that one for now.
And Nevada's a fine program, too.
And Nevada's a good team. That's not a bye game loss, which one of those teams that I mentioned had later in the week. But Washington's going to finish near the bottom. That's not exactly surprising, considering the roster they've put together. But, Joe, we're going to go to Sunday. And the big game on Sunday included your Michigan Wolverines. They headed down to Greensboro to play Wake Forest. And sort of like the Northwestern game, Michigan looked good for probably 3/4 to 80% of this game. And they just were not able to get the job done down the stretch. Wake wins 72-70, and Michigan drops another close game. Let us know what you thought about this one.
Yeah, I was actually pretty impressed by Michigan through most of this game, as you said, Sean. I think they have an offensive identity. I think the big criticism is that people want Vlad Golden to be a little more assertive. The three-point shooting in the first half was there. Clearly, that 50% was not going to translate into the second half. I think one thing that was particularly of major concern was the turnovers in the second half. You would expect that out of an LJ Casey, but he only had one. It was really Danny Wolf committing 6 turnovers. Roddy Gale with some bad slip-ups, even a Reuben Jones in his limited time. We know this team is deep, Sean. They can beat you in a lot of different ways, but also, if you turn the ball over, that all goes down the tube. And against the team in Wake Forest, who was projected, I believe, 3rd or 4th in the ACC, it's going to cost you, especially in Greensboro, which this was more to be a road game than a neutral game. So, all that said, Sean, Wake Forest was really good down the stretch, whether it was Spiller, whether it was Hunter Salas, and even Efton Reed, who made his presence down low at times. There were too many ways they could beat you, and each time Wake Forest had an opportunity, they capitalized. And I think the defining play of the game was the Vlad Golden Danny Wolf travel on the wet spot toward the free throw line, and Roddy Gale slipping in the same spot and turning it over. That was the difference of 2 points, and that's why Michigan ended up losing. I do think they look good, and I think a bad performance in the second half to only lose by 2 to a top 5 team in the ACC. I think there were a lot worse ways Michigan's lost games in the past. So their game, which if you're listening, it'll be tonight against TCU. Their game tonight's going to tell me a lot.
And it certainly will. I think the concerns for Michigan here, Joe, are just kind of what we've been saying coming up to the season. Who is their go-to guy? You have Gale leading the way with 11, Donaldson with 10, Burnett, Kaysen with 10, Jones, Walters, Burnett with 9, Golden with 8. That's a lot of good players there. You're going to have to find somebody to take the ball late, and the offense just kind of stalled out at an unfortunate time for Michigan. Wake right now is looking like a bubble team, as they've been for the last couple of years. The weak ACC certainly won't help them, but maybe this win does if Michigan turns it around. But There's a lot of long-term concerns we could talk about here, Joe, but the rebounding was where I saw the biggest disparity. Just 7 rebounds between Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf, and then the two starting forwards for Wake Forest with 15, and then the big guy off the bench for Wake with 5. So essentially 20 to 8 if you count Sam Walters' rebounds. It rebounds in the forward department. That is something that we should look out for.
Absolutely, Sean. That's a great point I forgot to mention. And should that continue, I think Michigan, I think as of now, we could interpret them as a bubble team. So I think if that continues to trend in the wrong direction for the Wolverines, they'll be looking outside in for the 3rd straight year, which is almost insane to say.
Yeah, and you got a great opportunity against TCU. We'll get to it later. But which way is this team going to go? Dusty's a good coach. He's probably a better coach than Steve Forbes, Jamie Dixon. It didn't look like it. But, Joe, how much leeway are you giving this Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf duo here? Because it seems that when one of them's off the floor, the team looks better.
Yeah, Sean, I don't give it a lot of leeway, to be completely honest with you. I think in theory it sounds good. In practice, it's especially against a team like Wake Forest. Against a Cleveland State and a Youngstown State and even a Western Kentucky, it might be cute, but let's face it, Sean, Michigan's not in the business of being cute. Whether Dusty likes it or not, the expectation for this team is to get back to the tournament or at least play meaningful games in March. If that duo turns it over like it has, you can't leave him out there. And I think Danny Wolf is ultimately a good player, but he's kind of testing what he can do at this level, and I'm sure that's okay in the long run, but in the immediate future, it's very frustrating to see.
Yeah, and I think we'll see a little bit more of Danny Wolf at the 5 in the near future because he is not the quickest big guy, or if you say starting at the 4, he's not the quickest 4. He can shoot it. He has great touch around the rim. So if he plays the 5, you can drag the other team's big out. And Shetter and Walters, I think we'll see a little more from them minutes-wise and maybe a little less from Golden and Wolf. But Golden's, as good of a veteran big as you can get in college these days. He's played a lot of college basketball games. Rebounding has never been a huge strength of his. He's never averaged 7 a game, going back to his days at FAU. And if he's not rebounding, I don't think he can be out there in the Big Ten. So that is something to look out for. You got a couple good options off the bench, so if you do have to limit Vlad Golden's minutes, you certainly could. But all right, let's go to Monday, Joe. And actually, we're just going to talk about a couple teams here that have played a couple games. Purdue's one of them. They did have an 8-point win over Yale on Monday. They are 3-0. 2 of their bye games have been a lot closer than you'd expect. A big one on Friday for the Boilermakers, but what do you attribute this lack of blowing out bye games to?
I think it's a complete miscommunication on defense, Sean, particularly in the second half. I don't know.
The defense does not look good.
I don't know, truthfully, if it's that teams are hitting like a lot of threes because Yale shot over 30% from 3, but I'm attributing that a lot more to their defensive breakdowns in the second half. And I think you could factor fatigue in. Yes, they have 5 guys off the bench, but it really seems like only 3 are doing much of anything, that being a CJ Cox, Miles Colvin, Cameron Heide. So I look at this, Sean, and I think that's a big concern for the Boilermakers based on their expectation for the year. I don't think this team, by any stretch, is in danger of not making the tournament. I think what they are in danger of, though, is losing a lot more games than last year. And if this pattern continues, it's not going to be a welcoming sight. And even some of the foul stuff. Yale only shot 10 of 19 from the free throw line. Most teams aren't going to give you that luxury where they're shooting 50 or slightly above 50%. So if I'm Purdue, those are my 2 biggest things. Finding some more depth off the bench. And we've talked about this with Braden Smith. Finding him more help. I think Kaufman, Wren, and Fletcher Lawyer in all 3 games have shown they can do it. Right now, my particular concern would be finding better solutions off the bench and finding a solution to this defensive breakdown.
Yeah, the 2-point defense is a number that is a little bit shocking after so many years of really even before Zach Edey just being really good defensively inside. To give up 25 twos to Yale, that's a lot of twos. it's one thing if a mid-major team comes into your place and shoots 35 threes and makes 13 of them, and they keep it close for a little bit, but just the 8 threes from Yale, they're a team that is a pretty good shooting team. So I'm not sure this was even like a good outcome for them, which is a little bit scary from Purdue. They don't really have a lot of size inside. Even when they stack Kaufman right at the 4 with Will Berg or Caleb First or Burgess, they're still giving up too many easy looks, and that is something to look out for, especially considering who's coming into town next. The team that dunks and threes is all they do, but with Daniel Jacobson out for the season, I think a rather glaring hole is appearing already for Purdue. Now, I still think they're probably a top 25 team. They're still going to make the tournament. They're still going to finish in the top 4, but there's certainly going to be a drop-off from the elite team that we've seen. And at this point, Joe, you have to put their ceiling at 12 or 13 Big Ten wins, I think, which is still a good basketball team, don't get me wrong, but they're just going to find themselves in a couple of games that probably shouldn't be games, and then when that happens, you end up losing a couple of them. All right, the other team that we expected to finish near at the top of the leaderboard at the beginning of the season, the Indiana Hoosiers, Joe, just 2-0 so far. A little bit worrying there on Sunday afternoon as Eastern Illinois took a 1-point lead into the locker room at halftime, but a dominating 54-18 second half, and the Hoosiers win by 35. It's the first time they have covered the analytical betting spread in over 2 years in a non-conference game, which is pretty shocking. There's been a couple that are close over the years, and if you had bought a point here and there, maybe you got it, but last year they went 0-for in the non-conference in terms of boosting their analytical numbers, and while it was nervous early, they got the job done here. What do you think of this one?
I think offensively, this is what you wanted from Indiana, particularly from the big 3 starters, which is Ballo, Malik Renew, and Mackenzie Mbako. I do think Miles Rice is showing, and I think you predicted this, Sean, of being more of a facilitator than a scorer. So I think that aspect from those big 3 was really good. I want to highlight Bryson Tucker, 12 points off the bench. I think that's a welcome sight. If he could contribute in that manner, maybe not every game, but once every other game, I think Indiana really has something brewing. Sean, I'm more curious to hear your take. What were some concerns and obviously your overall takeaway from these 2 games?
So I actually didn't get to watch the first half, and I turned the TV on for the second half only and saw a team that was thoroughly dominant. Not really sure how that could have happened in the first half. I did watch it back, and they made a lot of threes, and they were putting Indiana in chase situations, and then, they ended up running them off the three-point line, and then, how that goes. But I'm actually more interested in talking about the defense so far. Joe, we talked about how bad they were last year defensively against some of these non-conference opponents, and they gave up a bad points per possession number in that non-conference, and they ended up just winning games by pumping it inside and wearing teams out late, and that's why so many games are close. But 6 of 18, you like to see 20 3-point attempts per game. Mbako's been great so far. The rebounding was much better in this game. And you're starting to see some roles carved out for these players. Last year, Joe, in terms of the guards, it was Trey Galloway, whether he was playing well or not. And sometimes that would be great, like against Kansas when he got 30. And then sometimes he just didn't really have it. And Xavier Johnson didn't have it, and he didn't have any other options. But you have Rice, who didn't do anything crazy in this game, 5 points, 5 assists. Carlisle with just 6. But you got Tucker with 12 and 6 off the bench. If he can average, 8-9 points a game, that'll be big. You have Luke Goody adding 2 threes. That's what's expected of him. And you have Galloway adding 8 assists off the bench in just 18 minutes. There's a couple of options here if things aren't working out. And everyone's already, claiming this season as a failure for Woodson. There are some improvements over last year. And you say, well, these are bye games. This proves nothing. Well, they struggled with these games last year. The under 4 timeout at the opening 2 games last year, it was tied against Florida Gulf Coast and Army. So I do think we've seen a couple of improvements from last year, especially on the defensive end. And Joe, they were barely inside the top 100 defensively last year, and they come in at 30th on KenPom. So that's something that the Woodson teams early on that made the tournament were very good defensively. So I think that's something that we should look out for there. The Hoosiers host South Carolina on Sunday, and we can talk about that in a little bit. All right, last team that we're going to talk about here, Joe, and that's Illinois. They are 3-0 on the season. They have played three bye games. They won the first two by a lot. They did struggle a little bit against Oakland, but ultimately they did end up getting the job done by 12. Roles are starting to form for them, too, and you have to say it's been impressive so far.
Yeah, Sean, I want to highlight my guy, Kasparas Yakonis, one of the guys I highlighted in the preseason. Even though he didn't fill up the stat sheet at all last night, only 4 points, the way he sees the game, the rebounding, the assists, I think that's the kind of development Illinois needed. And, to have the freshmen contribute the way they've been, too. And the scary part is, Sean, you don't even really know who do you think their best player is? That's how I'll phrase this.
You could probably make the argument for four different players.
Right.
Yakashonis, Riley, Ivisic, or Humrickhouse. They've all been really good.
Yeah, so they could beat you in multiple different ways. Why that's good for Illinois versus bad for Michigan is Illinois hasn't seen a close game yet. I'm sure this will be an issue that comes up later on, especially if they do end up on the wrong side of a few of these closer games. And I don't think it'll be a bye game based on the way Brad Underwood's handled business the last 3 years. So Illinois, a lot of talk in this conference, Sean, that them and Indiana are now the two best teams, especially after Purdue's underwhelmed through their first 3 games, and UCLA did drop that stinker to New Mexico. So now the expectations are going to be a little raised. I do think that's a little egregious based on the fact they're still a young team where they're having 3 freshmen already contribute. So I think this will be a team that grows, but from where they're growing from, they already got a head start. So
yeah, 28% from three, 7 of 25 in this game to win easily. Doing that, pretty good sign for them. You've had a bunch of different. Ivisic with 20, Riley 30 early on. They've got a couple options too. Trey White and Kylan Boswell, they're veteran guards, and I don't think they've played all that great so far. And that's no offense to them; they haven't really had to, but there's still another gear this Illinois team can get to, in my opinion. And while they do get this weekend off, Joe, they also face Alabama next, and that's I guess you want to call it neutral, in Birmingham, Alabama. So we get to see 2 Big Ten teams in a row against a team that many consider to be the best in the sport. So it'll be a good barometer for Purdue. They host them at Mackey. Maybe they can get the win there. And then Illinois going down to a pretend neutral game down there in Alabama. So that's to look out for in the future for them. All right, one bye game, Joe, that did not go the Big Ten's way, unfortunately for them. North Texas goes into the barn and beats Minnesota. This game was extremely ugly, 23-14 at halftime. Both teams shooting, well below 40% on the day. Unfortunately for Minnesota, it looks like they're headed for another bottom of the barrel year.
yeah, Sean, this is a typical Minnesota game. Dawson Garcia with 24 points, although a lot of his points came from the free throw line. This is an offense that kind of looks the same as last year, except this time you don't have the benefit of why is the name escaping me? The Texas Tech guy,
The guy Hawkins.
Hawkins.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're missing contributors like him, and now it's showing. So, not great for Minnesota, not great for Ben Johnson, and I'm not talking about Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator of the Lions, who's going to be a head coach next year. I'm talking Ben Johnson, who might not be a head coach next year.
No, definitely not.
If
Definitely
Minnesota
not.
continues to lose games like this. And I do think he had inherited a pretty bad situation from Richard Pitino, who's killing it at New Mexico. Regardless, though, Sean, you can't lose games like this to North Texas. Although a respectable program, to have that kind of offensive performance is pretty shocking. And all I'm saying is it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah, and to get a 24-8 performance from Dawson Garcia, to get 27 points outside of him, that is a damaging sign, if we're being honest. And shout out to my guy Jasper Floyd on North Texas, the Fairfield transfer. He might end up with a triple-double this year. He's averaging 11, 6, and 5 so far this year for the Mean Green. And, Joe, you never know for them in an American Conference that has no more Dusty May, has no more Kelvin Sampson. Now maybe they'll find themselves in the tournament, and Minnesota will be looking at this one as a missed opportunity. Um, Another thing, Joe, Champions Classic was Tuesday for Michigan State. Mike and I
Yes.
did spend a lot of time on this
Sure.
yesterday, so I won't go over it again. But if you want to add anything on Michigan State, you can go ahead.
I do think my overwhelming takeaway is I was impressed with Michigan State. I think they are a lot deeper than last year. That's something we questioned a lot, particularly from their activity in the transfer portal. I think Jace Richardson's ahead of schedule for a freshman. I think the Aikens 2 points or 4 points, whatever it really was, the 1 of 7 from the field is not going to be consistent at all, especially for their best player. The fact they were that close with that kind of performance from a Hunter Dickinson, they put Kansas in a lot of bad situations. They made Kansas not run the floor well, and I thought Jackson Kohler again is showing a lot of improvement. I think that's a performance by Michigan State that Tom Izzo's not going to look at too harshly internally.
Yeah, if they make a couple shots, they win the game. It's really that
Totally.
simple. And against the number one team in the country, that's all you can really ask for. Is can it be a game, and can we make a couple shots down the stretch? Now it didn't happen, but I do think they're a little bit better than last year. As much as they lost and as inexperienced as this team is, uh, you know, people are like, "Oh, it wasn't the prettiest style." Well, where have you been the last couple of years? That's going to win games in the Big Ten. That sort of performance, it might not win them the league, but it'll probably end them up near the top of the standings, if we're being honest. All right, Joe, we've got a ton of good games over the next couple days. Now, this is tonight if you're listening today. So Friday night at 6 p.m. Eastern, we have got TCU going on the road to your Michigan Wolverines at the Chrysler Center. The Horned Frogs are 3-0, three bye-game victories over Florida A&M, Florida Gulf Coast, and Texas State, each one getting closer and closer. And Michigan coming off that loss against Wake Forest. The odds so far have the Wolverines at -8.5. That is a
That's
large.
shocking.
That is a large number so far. So TCU definitely not supposed to be near the top of the Big 12. It's a good opportunity for Michigan to bounce back.
Yeah, Sean. And would you assess TCU as a bubble team? That's probably where I'd put them.
Not quite. I think they're probably a little bit below that at this point.
Yeah.
They roster wise, they lost a lot from last year, and you have to say their best player right now is a former Michigan player, and that's Frankie
Frankie
Collins.
Collins.
The
Yeah.
Frankie Collins revenge game. But at this point, Joe, I don't think TCU is in the tournament picture. Now, a victory here would certainly change it, but I think they're definitely a step below Wake Forest in terms of the bubble right now. Wake Forest is definitely on the bubble.
Right. With all that said, Sean, I do think Michigan will win this game. I think the whole crowd advantage for the first time in like a year and a half is going to be a factor. I do think down low, Michigan is going to put a lot heavier of an emphasis. I don't think TCU has the sheer amount of bodies to match that, whether it's Walters, Golden, or even a Danny Wolf or Will Shetter. So I think Michigan can offense TCU to death. One thing that's of particular concern is Frankie Collins, whether it's been at the slight time he was at Michigan, whether it's been at Arizona State. He can move the ball really well, Sean, and he's not afraid to go after boards either. I do think Michigan is going to clean up the turnovers because if they don't, I will tell you this: TCU will cover that 8.5 in their sleep, no problem. So, uh, how would I put this, Sean? I really think should Michigan limit the turnovers, I doubt they'll have as many. Danny Wolf, I'll make the bold prediction, 1 of 6 personal turnovers himself. I think Michigan does win this game, probably close to that 8.5, but I think the Wolverines win like a 71-65 kind of game.
Yeah, the analytics do have it a little bit tighter. Torvik has it at 5.5. Ken Palm at
Yeah.
6. So, Michigan certainly should win this game. And if you think about it from a TCU standpoint, I don't think TCU is finishing in the top half of the Big Ten. And if you're Michigan, you want to be in that middle of the pack. You got to beat a team outside the top half at home, and I think they will. I think it'll probably be a game where you're up 8 at halftime, and you just can't quite shake them really, but you're in control, and you end up winning 72-60 or something like that. But I do think you should win this. If you do what you did at Wake Forest, you'll win this game, and I still think there's a lot of improvements that could be made there. All right, up next, Joe, on Friday is another good one. We have got Alabama, number 2 in the country, going on the road to Mackey Arena to play Braden Smith and Purdue. Alabama comes in as slight favorites at -2. Great test for Purdue to silence a couple of their doubters so far.
Yeah, Sean, this is an awesome basketball game for the first real Friday in college basketball. It does not get much better than this, to be honest with you. Uh, how are they going to live with Mark Sears, Wrightsell Jr., even a Cliff Amore, who's been relatively impressive? He's not been playing starter minutes, but he's a familiar foe to Purdue, and he's not going to be very friendly, even though he's in a Roll Tide uniform. So what I'm looking for here, Alabama 2.5 point favorites. I'm actually surprised it's that tight, to be honest with you. I thought Alabama, based on the way they played, based on the way Purdue's played, would be about a 5 or 6. Either way, Sean, I do think Purdue is going to have to play elite defense throughout the entire game. I think if they have a bad 4 to 8 minute stretch, NATO's teams will capitalize off that, especially if they're on. So I look at this game, Sean, and I really think it comes down to can Purdue communicate? Can someone else? There's 3 questions Purdue's going to have to answer to me. Can someone else help Braden Smith, whether it's a Fletcher lawyer or anyone else? Can someone communicate on defense? Can the entire team communicate on defense, rather? And at the end of the day, if Alabama's lights out like they've been a lot of last year and so far from the beginning of this year, can you survive the onslaught?
Yeah, and one will look at Alabama's games so far, and they have actually struggled in a couple of their bye games. An 8-point win against Arkansas State and an 8-point win against McNeese State. But both those teams are slated to be pretty good in the top 100. So that's probably why it's a little bit closer to even than we probably thought. And ESPN Analytics actually gives Purdue a better chance to win this game, but I really don't see it. I think Purdue's defensive flaws kind of play right into Alabama's strengths. They're gonna run up and down the floor. They're gonna fire threes, and they're gonna get a lot of easy looks at the rim based on what Purdue's produced defensively inside so far. So if Purdue tries to outshoot them, that's not gonna happen. If both teams shoot 35 threes, Alabama will make more, and they will win the game by a lot. And if Purdue there's a way that Purdue can stick to their game plan, keep it close, and let Braden go down the stretch, but I'd probably give Alabama an 8 out of 10 chance to win this game. I think they will win it, and they're just going to be too much offensively for Purdue, and I think their defensive flaws are going to be a little bit more noticeable against a team as good as the Crimson Tide. All right, Joe, we got a bunch of good games tomorrow. We'll go through them quickly. Virginia Tech at Penn State at the Hall of Fame Series in Baltimore, 7:30 on Peacock. Both teams are 3-0. Penn State, good opportunity to get a victory here as they try and make their way out of the bottom of the league.
Yeah, Sean, I think this will certainly raise the expectation on Penn State. I do think they will have a lot to prove beyond this, whether it's a win and especially if it's a loss. But so far, I do think the fact they haven't slipped up yet is quite positive, and this would be their first big boost to their season, I think.
Offensively, they've 92, 103, 108. Not something that I expected or saw coming, and it's not as if Virginia Tech are an amazing team either. This is a good opportunity for a victory.
Yeah, Sean, and it hasn't just been Ace Baldwin Jr. either. It's been Yannick, it's been the Northern Illinois transfer, it's been Zach Hicks too. So, maybe this 3-man duo, if they can keep this consistent, maybe there's something brewing at State College a little early on in the Mike Rhodes era.
All right, up next, Joe, we've got Marquette, number 15 in the country. Shaka Smart going on the road to College Park to play former Big East foe Kevin Willard and the Maryland Terrapins. The Terrapins are slight favorites here. They have sort of gone under the radar and looked pretty solid so far in their 3 bye games. Jacoby Gillespie, Rice, Queen, Reese, all averaging over 13 points a game. Cam Jones will be the best player on the court for Marquette. They struggled a little bit with the Chippewas of Central Michigan last time out. A little bit surprised to see Maryland as the favorites here.
Not at all, to be honest with you, Sean. I think the fact they're at home has a significant amount to do with it. I think Rodney Rice, Derek Queen, and Julian Reese. I think that trio's been really good. I think Jacoby Gillespie's just the cherry on top because I expected those 3 guys to really carry. I'm shocked Julian Reese Hasn't scored more, to be quite frank, but he's been contributing obviously on the board. So I don't think that's too big a shock. I am going to be a Big Ten homer here, Sean. I do think Maryland will win this game by quite a lot. I think this is the kind of crowd that might engulf Marquette should they get off to a bad start, which at Xfinity Center, teams, whether it's been in the Big Ten or out of conference, have been known to do. So give me the Terrapins.
And that is 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Fox Sports 1. I just think Cam Jones is going to be too much for Maryland. I do think they go down there and get the win. They still have Colin Ross. They still have Chase Ross, sorry. They still have David Joplin, Stevie Mitchell, Bright Gold. Like, they still have a really good starting five, and I do think they're better, and I think they'll get the W. Now, the next game for them on Tuesday is where they host Purdue. So a double Big Ten slide there before Marquette goes down to the Bahamas. But that's another interesting one where you got to have a couple screens tomorrow if you're going to watch the Big Ten college basketball, because plenty of good games. We've got Washington State going on the road to Iowa. Washington State's a team that was great last year, made the tournament, won a game with Miles Rice, and Iowa is 3-0 so far, kind of going under the radar as well, scoring a lot of points as they usually do. But this is 8:30 at the Vibrant Arena in Moline, Illinois. So not sure how this game happened, but Iowa's got a chance to pick up a pretty good non-conference win here.
Yeah, Sean, the fact this is a neutral game, meaning this only has to be a top 50 win for a quad one, is huge. And Moline, for people who don't know, that's West Illinois. That's as close to Iowa. It practically is Iowa.
That's Quad Cities range right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Iowa will have a significant home court advantage. I think Owen Freeman and Peyton Sandford, the combination of those guys, is going to be significant. Only 4.5. I do think, like Maryland, Iowa might cruise in this game, and I'm more inclined between those two games to pick Iowa to cruise, simply because of their offensive efficiency, kind of a home court advantage against the team you don't play very frequently, unless it's the month of March, which last I checked, it's November. I love Iowa in these kinds of games.
Yeah, analytics has got it at 3.5, so a little bit tighter than the sports books. But Joe, I think Washington's just kind of a less good version, or Washington State is a less good version of Iowa, if we're being honest. They score a lot of points at a pretty efficient clip, but they also let it in. And so usually when teams play similarly, the better team wins. So I'm going to go with Iowa here, and I think it's probably in the 10 to 15 range. All right, we've got a couple more games that we want to get to here. Arizona, number 9 in the country, Caleb Love, goes on the road to Madison to play Greg Gard and the Badgers. Arizona's 2-0 with 2 big wins in bye games, and Wisconsin is 3-0 after 3 wins in bye games also. The Wildcats come in as 5-point favorites here into Madison. This is 9 o'clock on Peacock. Great opportunity for Wisconsin to pick up a quad 1 win.
Yeah, Sean, and they've been known to do this under Greg Gard in recent years. I know kind of the last, let's call it, even last year going to the Big Ten tournament final. They've been somewhat underwhelming, particularly the year before, barely missing the tournament. But they've been known to beat teams like a Marquette or a lot of these other teams. Why am I blanking on the other? It doesn't matter. But they've been known to pick up wins like this, especially at home. So I think this is going to be a really, really good game, really close. I do think it's going to come down to Wisconsin's presence down low. Can they out-rebound a Toby Awaka? Can they limit a Caleb Love? And can they limit a role player like a Jaden Bradley or even a Trey Townsend from going off? Trey Townsend's been a little disappointing at first, but you do figure he'll figure it out at some point. So can they avoid those 3 things from happening? Ultimately, I think they let Caleb Love have a little too much fun. And I do think that's going to end up being the difference, especially if Wisconsin has trouble scoring, which they've been known to do.
It's going to come down to the role players for Wisconsin for me. Can they provide enough offensively to make up for the Arizona Stars probably outscoring the Wisconsin Stars? And, this Arizona team is really deep, and Wisconsin certainly needs a good game from their top guys, but that could happen at home. The analytics has this much tighter, just a 1-point win for Arizona, which is a little bit shocking here. But, yeah, I'm going to go with Wisconsin here. I don't think the other games are very favorable to the Big Ten, whether it's Alabama or Marquette. Iowa, I think, is will win, and I think Wisconsin will win here. They're kind of going under the radar because everybody sort of wrote them off after they lost AJ Storr, and the little I've seen of them so far, I think they've been able to score it enough where you get your crowd behind it Friday night, and I think they could get the job done here, and it's a really good opportunity for one, Joe. You don't get a top 10 team rolling into your house very often, especially this year in the Big Ten. This might be the best team that they play all year. So give me Wisconsin here. All right, two more games we want to get to here, Joe, before we wrap it up. And it's also tomorrow night, and it's Ohio State going on the road to College Station, Texas, to play Texas A&M. This is the return of a home-and-home game last year in which Buzz Williams Aggies went into Value City Arena and won. So Ohio State's trying to return the favor. Both teams are ranked. Texas A&M did lose a road game to UCF on opening night before two big bye game wins, and then Ohio State is just 2-0. Remember that big win against Texas? They also smoked Youngstown State. So, Joe, Ohio State probably has the best win in the conference so far, and they've got a chance to add another really good one.
Yes, I think this is going to be offensively a game Ohio State might not struggle a lot in, meaning they're going to thrive. I don't know why I phrased that so strangely. I think defensively it's going to be a lot like Purdue. Defensively, can they get the job done against the Texas A&M team, who we did see struggle significantly against the UCF team? So I do think there's a pathway to victory for Ohio State. It's going to come down to it's not just Bruce Thornton anymore. Can Sean Stewart, can Aaron Bradshaw contribute? Can Michie Johnson finally get back in a groove fully? Uh, if one of those three guys, if two of them get going, because we know Bruce Thornton's almost a given at this stage. I think it's his third year in the conference. I think he's earned the trust of any fan or analyst in this conference. I do think Ohio State has a lot better chance than being 6.5 point dogs. Ultimately, I do think they lose a close one, but I'm pretty shocked to see that line be so large.
Yeah, it's a little like I guess it's maybe the books overhyping home court a little bit, but the analytics has this a little tighter at 5, so maybe that's something to read into for simple college basketball fans. Texas A&M is a little better than they have been over the years. It's basically been the Wade Taylor show. And Zurich Phillips, the SMU transfer, I think, he is a big-time scorer. He averaged almost 18 a game last year at 18 a game last year at SMU, and then 15 the year before. So they definitely have a little bit of a two-headed monster. It used to be kind of just Wade Taylor, and he'd take 20 shots a game, and they'd go as he goes. But now they do have a little bit of a safety valve there if Wade Taylor does not make shots. But yeah, you need big performances from a lot of players to win this game if you're Ohio State. That goes beyond Bruce Thornton. You probably need the forwards to play a little better than they did against Texas, and then those guards off the bench to do what they did against Texas. But a lot of people think Texas is a better team than Texas A&M, and you already beat them. So maybe you could get the job done here. I do think it'll be a slight Aggies win, but this is one that I would watch out for. This is 9 o'clock on SEC Network. I do think there's a way Ohio State could win this, and this is probably the biggest chance of an upset that I see happening, because I do really like the way that Diebler and Ohio State play. All right, we got one more game that we want to talk about, Joe, and this is on Sunday, 3 o'clock on Peacock. Indiana hosts Lamont Paris and South Carolina. The Gamecocks did lose their opener to North Florida before winning their next two bye games handily, and Indiana rolls in at 2-0. This is definitely Indiana's biggest game in the non-conference other than the Atlantis games, and it's a good opportunity for them to get to 3-0.
Yeah, Sean. I think this is probably their first. I mean, definitely their first real game. Uh, I don't know. I don't see Indiana struggling much in this, to be completely honest with you. You hear the rumblings about the Tennessee scrimmage, however true, however false. I do think they really thrived in that. I do see South Carolina as a worse version of a Tennessee team. So, do I think Indiana rolls in this? Probably not, but I do think they win comfortably. Probably similar to your TCU analysis with Michigan, where
Yeah.
Indiana probably has a 5, 6 point lead a lot of this game. They have chances to extend it to double digits, and if they do, it won't be for long. So, I think the combo, the trio of Ballo, Renew, and whether it's a Miles Rice, whether even a Bryson Tucker off the bench, I think it's finding that third guy, right? I think we know Reneau's going to be a factor. I think we know Ballo at some point is going to take over. Uh, it's really the third guy, and maybe even if it's a Miles Rice on the in the assist category too. So uh, give me the Hoosiers by 10 in this shot. I don't think they're going to blow South Carolina out by any measures. I just think offensively they've figured it out, and you have to you would have to guess defensively that this is the game they kind of put it together.
Yeah, and for in terms of South Carolina, they kind of go as Colin Murray Boyles goes. Now he's an excellent player, probably first team all conference. But him kind of being that sort of stretch four that doesn't really shoot threes, but sits on the perimeter for a lot at 6'7". There's a lot of people who can guard that on Indiana. Whether they put Ballo on him, it could be Reneau, it could be Mbako, it could be Goody. I mean, you've got four players who could probably guard Colin Murray Boyles, and I think mixing up the looks on him, making him give it up, and Woodson in game plans for teams that are centered around one player has been pretty good in the past, whether it was Zach Edey or countless other examples. But I do think if this is not a sort of Indiana's in the lead the whole game type of game, I do think that'll be a little bit worrying. North Florida is a pretty good team, but South Carolina did lose to them. Indiana favored by 6 here on analytics. The Sportsbooks lines isn't out yet. If I had to guess, it'll be a little more just on what we're seeing, but it's a good opportunity for a Power 5 win. I don't think South Carolina would. I think they'd be in the bottom third of the Big Ten, and you're talking about a bottom third of the Big Ten team coming into your house. You got to win it probably by double digits, and I think it will be that sort of 12-16 final score where Indiana's up by 7-12 for the whole second half. But that's all the time we have for everybody today. We'll be with you early next week, whether it's football, whether it's basketball. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.